So here's the real treat of this moment, which is that Court and I have known each other since he was probably 5 and I was 6, and we carpooled together. So I now get to have a conversation with one of my old and favorite neighbors in front of you all, and I'm really excited about it. So the first thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to read you a little bit of this book that I wrote, Gatak, which is a memoir in conversations. My clever publisher came up with that tagline because for me it was supposed to be conversations I'm still confused about. But as the year got harder and harder during Trump's election, and as my son was asking himself more questions about who he was and what America was and if he was okay, and if I was asking myself those questions as well, all the conversations that showed up in this book were the ones that he didn't know how to make sense of in a really specific way. I didn't know at certain points whether or not I was really an American or not, and if we were ever going to be really American or not. This particular chapter that I'm going to read is a little bit of a tangent to that. It is about my father, and it is called Summer on the Television. And one of the things I want you guys to know is when I read this, I'm going to do both him and my mother's accents, which are the accents of two people that have been out of India for about 40 years and have lived in New Mexico. Okay, Summer on the Television. Growing up, I thought American parents, the really cool ones anyway, smoked weed with their kids. That did not happen. My parents were insanely strict. So you guys only got high on holidays? Sometimes when I was feeling bad about having parents who would never really understand me, I would lie in bed imagining all the epiphanies the stoned American families around us were having. Dad, I really just don't want to be a doctor. You know, I think I only wanted that for you because my own childhood was filled with so much economic instability, but I get it. Be a musician. Want some ice cream? In terms of understanding my life choices, my parents were pretty epiphany-free. But being a writer isn't a real job. Do something that gives you stability. You can always write on the side. She's right. You have to be able to support your children. I don't even want children. You have to want children. That's a recurring parental conversation from 1984 to 2003. The year after I got married, the recurring parental conversation stopped. Mira, I have the cancer. No. Yes, it's going to be okay. Dad. My dad getting cancer was not okay. It was not okay the first year with the first surgery, and by the third year, second surgery, and 5th round of chemo, it was really not okay. Eat one chapati, just one. You're wasting away. I can't. Dad, have you tried smoking weed? Are you nuts? The drugs will kill him. Thing you didn't imagine doing in your 30s. House of the guy everyone bought weed from in high school. Hey, does Dave still live here? My name is Cooper. I am 6. That's fantastic. Goodbye forever, Cooper. Thing you did not imagine doing ever. Hey, it's Mira. I was wondering if you knew where I could get some, it's for my dad. Guy who was always high in high school. Dude, seriously? That one guy you went on a date with once. Wait, who is this? One of the carpool moms. You betcha. Come on over, honey. The first time I brought weed home, it did not go well. Oh my God. You know the drug dealers? Who saw you do this? The FBI will come. You want us to get arrested? Oh my God, what kind of child are you? Your mother cannot go to jail for a crime she did not commit. I will not let that happen. Mrs. Reed gave it to me for you. Mrs. Reed doesn't. Yes, she does. No. It's going to be okay. Mira, Getting my dad high wasn't easy at first. Absolutely not. It'll help you eat. No. If you eat, Mom will be happy. Give it to me. This is your dad on drugs, day 1. Can I have a little more rice? Yes. What else? Do we have ice cream? Nobody move. I'm going to go buy ice cream. This is your dad on drugs, week 2. Do you know what is so funny? My old friend Charles comes and sees me every day at 4:20, and do you know what he wants to do? I can guess. This is your dad on drugs, month 3. Can you believe this Google Earth? It's a miracle. I can sit here in my chair and fly pishoom anywhere in the whole entire world. I went to the Grand Canyon and the Forbidden City all in one night. What a beautiful life. What a time to be alive. Dad. What? Nothing. One night, my dad finally asked, "You want some?" What? Really? I almost didn't do it, because it wasn't really in character with what I knew of him. But then neither was dying of cancer. We got high. We ate chips and ice cream and peanut brittle. We watched TV. We laughed loudly and for too long at everything. A commercial came on with an old man driving a little boy in a dark red sports car. It was summer on the television. It was winter outside. Something popped into my mind, not quite clear, but on the periphery, something that I would understand if I turned and looked at it directly. I turned and looked at my dad. He said it. "I'll never know your children." Two years after my dad died, I had a son. 3 years after that, I finished my first novel. Did Appa like your book? He died before I finished it, so he didn't get to read it. Can you carry me? Hey, I have an idea. How about we get all the pages and put them on the stoop, and when a big wind comes, it will blow them up into heaven, and Appa can read your book, and it will be beautiful. What do you think? Dad. What? Nothing. Great idea. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mira. And it's great to be here again. My name is Court Voorhees. I'm a Houston writer. I have been here for 13 years, a graduate of the U of H creative writing program, and carpool mate of Mira to 3rd grade, at least. This is great, actually, for me because I don't know if any of you have writer friends, but oftentimes you will get a chance to read one of their books, and then maybe you will talk about it. And so this first time I get to talk about it with you after having read the book, and you just happen to be here. So thank you for being here. Can we talk a little bit about you touched on it on the previous panel, but the format that you ended up with in tackling this. Did you start here, or did you land here, and kind of what was the progression?
Okay, so I didn't start here. I started with trying to write an essay about my son asking me a lot of questions about Michael Jackson's skin color. And it was going very badly, that particular essay, because every sentence that I wrote, I was imagining all the ways in which people would read it and decide that it wasn't true. And the things that he was asking me was, you know, are white people afraid of brown people? Is Daddy afraid of us? I want to turn myself white. He had all of these ideas, and I knew when I was writing them down in an essay, I could just feel all the people that were ready to ridicule him and ridicule me and sort of make fun of these questions because they had no place in themselves for the fear that lives behind those questions. So I drew us, as I was saying in the last panel, I drew us on printer paper, I cut us out, And I ran to his room and I got his Michael Jackson albums and I put them on the dining room table, and then I put the paper, kind of paper doll versions of us on that. And then I drew the conversation in bubbles and put those on top of the albums, and then I stood on my dining room table, which no one should ever stand on my dining room table, but I did it for art. And I took pictures, and then I cropped those pictures and I sent them to a friend, and I said, I feel like this is a visual essay, can you publish it? And he said yes. I knew when I did that, reading over the whole chapter, and I knew that there was something about my son being brown in America that's largely discussed in terms of black and white, and his kinship with Michael Jackson, and my own feeling of trying to find myself on the spectrum. I knew that it would resonate. I didn't know how deeply it would resonate. So one of the things that was really wild about that first piece was it went wildly viral. I think the last time I looked at it, it had 5 million hits. It was one of those weird pieces that just goes out into ether, and every once in a while it comes back up and people go crazy about it again. But in the course of drawing that and writing it, I suddenly thought of all of these conversations that lived in me. All of these conversations that told me some tiny bit of whether or not we were American. So even that one that I read you, there was something about that that felt like we were finally American in that moment, but we were also so uniquely not American as well. And all of those tiny intersections are what this book is. It's trying to kind of say, like, this is what my life looks like, and maybe parts of my life also look like yours, and maybe you haven't seen yourself before in this way. So in that way, it became really necessary for me to make it a visual book. I always joke that there are 13 women of color on my book. They're all me, really. It's all little drawings of me. But just even having that, even having all of those dark faces in that cover gives me a tremendous amount of joy, because I didn't grow up with that. So that was part of it.
It's interesting you mentioned the thinking about how people would respond to,
Yeah.
or being lost in an essay. For me, what was the most powerful in this format is that with just the dialogue back and forth, with the expressionless faces, with the cutouts being on top of a background as opposed to part of it, there's a visceral immediacy to the words that doesn't give me time to excuse make in my own head.
Oh,
right?
That's so interesting. Yeah.
So I'm thinking, if this is long, beautiful prose, then I will have time before I get to the end of the sentence to have composed my retort, right?
Yeah.
And so nothing that I'm reading lands because I'm already building that wall.
Yeah.
And with even with what we just heard, it's so now and immediate and visceral to me that I think maybe that's one way that that the format helps this particular.
Yeah, and I had rules for myself when I was writing it that kind of go along with that. Like the first version of this that I wrote, I remember thinking, you are not allowed to write down or explain a single feeling. You are only allowed to write the dialogue and the action. Only the dialogue and the action. And the weird thing about that, because I know a lot of you in the audience are also writers, is you'll know that there's like a fatigue, right, that you get when you're trying to explain something that is really precious to you and you can't quite get at it. And you try and the right thing doesn't happen and it doesn't kind of meet out on the paper. And I knew also I had this enormous sense of fatigue just about talking about race, period. But when I told myself you can only do the dialogue and you can only write the action, that meant that I was never explaining things. I was never trying to explain to a viewer how I felt. And so all of it, that meant that when the first draft of the book was done and I turned it in and I was like, I'm a genius. And then my editor came back and said, can you talk about what you're feeling? And I was like, oh no! But it was a great moment because I realized that I hadn't burnt myself out writing it, so I could go back and feel it. Like I could go back into certain sections and sort of unpack them emotionally because I wasn't too tired or too frustrated to do it. But
there were even sections where you didn't go back. And that to me, for example, there's after Z says, "Is Daddy afraid of us?"
Right.
And one of the next pages is you mentioning to Jed. Z asked if I was, if you were afraid of him, and then you almost kind of skip over that, and he says, "Wait, what?"
Yeah.
He said, and then he says, "What do we do about that?" And I don't know. And it's this very quick, boom, 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 3 or 4 exchanges, and then it's over. Right. But it's so efficient that you can get at so much more, it seems.
Well, see, and the thing that felt really right about that for me, just the way that we work as humans, is I feel like these conversations that we have in these moments, like you always have the fantasy of who you're going to be and how you're going to answer these questions and how you're going to stand up for yourself, and you're always so incredibly smart in those moments, but I never am in real life, frustratingly so. And so those conversations, those moments always just haunt me. And I wanted to get those in a place because I think those also, as much as they haunt you, they inform how you move through the world. They inform who you are in the world. And so you become this sort of amalgam of all of these half-finished, confused conversations. And there is a strange wholeness to that, but it was trying to find what does the wholeness of that look like, and the wholeness of it looked like this book.
And that's the title, Good Talk. It to me, when I read it, good talk. I don't know that I've ever said good talk after an actual good talk.
Right, no one ever does.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, no. This is awful. I
Yeah.
can't believe I'm going to have to think about this really for the next 100 years. And those are the ones that we remember, though. Those are the impactful ones, right? Those are the, I still remember when I blew it in my head. I think I blew it in a conversation with my son. I was not equipped to handle the question that he asked me at the time, and I don't think I would ever have been equipped to answer it because there's so much. How do you answer something as, seemingly, one sentence is "Daddy afraid of us"? I mean, you could prepare for that your whole life and not be able to, prepare for the impact of it.
Yeah, and I think there's the way in which you can outwardly, like I think in the moment I was like, no. There's a way in which you sort of front what is the right answer, but inside you is a world that has just been lit on fire, right? So there's the kind of the cool exterior that you present, and then there's just this burning village in the middle of you that you're thinking, how do I do this now? How do I stay a human now that this is part of my life?
There was something that you said in an interview where you mentioned that this format gave you the opportunity to show things that can be both mundane and horrible at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you could talk about how is that the experience of this on fire here and this cool here, that we just kind of need to get used to the fact that it's okay for things to be horrible and mundane, but we just need to be able to address it.
Absolutely.
And talk about it.
I think that's why the word, and I hate the word because to me the word microaggression almost translates into something you're petty enough to be angry about, where I feel like that's not actually what it is. It's an assault that like takes place a little bit over time, and what you're left with at the end of it is a nub of your humanity. And it is an assault, right? It's just a constant picking away at your identity. And so I think that is exactly the thing that we're trying to get our head around right now as a culture is, what does it mean for us to stand in a country and be of a country and constantly be asked where we're from and constantly be told, kind of in a kind of subtle way, you're lucky to be here. My mother had a friend who said to her, and it's in this book at the end, she said, you're always fighting about America. You're always, talking about ways that America can improve, and you're always, kind of going out to march and vote, and this country took you in. You are so lucky that this country took you in. And my mother said, this country was lucky to get my husband and my children. They have done a lot for this country. And I was like, Mom, what about you? And she goes, and I said, Mom, what about you? And she goes, me, not so much, but you.
So that brings me to the idea of that the project was kind of conceived before the 2016 election.
It was,
and yet it changed in response to it. Can you kind of go through some of the things that, I was thinking, for example, the 9/11 and some of the back and forth. So in the book, we kind of alternate between Mira and Z in having their conversations in the present moment, and Mira growing up in New Mexico, high school and college and after, and we kind of by the end of it have joined those two timelines.
Right.
How much of that structure, how much of that content was part of the pre-original pitch? Yeah.
Like maybe 20 pages of it. The original book was supposed to be so funny. It was going to be the funniest book. And people tell me this book is quite funny, which I'm relieved by, but it also turned. The election happened as I was writing this. The estrangement from my in-laws happened as I was writing this. I've always been told as a writer that you need to have a certain amount of psychic distance from something to write about it effectively, right? I think we all have heard that. You have to cool off before you can write, and I realized I was writing this from the middle of the battlefield. What do you do? How do you write something true when every day your heart is flipping between hope and horror? How do you write what's true? And I got really scared about what it was going to mean for my family, particularly my husband. My husband's a documentary filmmaker. He is so reticent to put himself in any story. He's so taken with the idea of telling other stories that when, in his last documentary, when someone suggested he narrated it, that he would narrate it, he freaked out. He was like, I can't do that. I'm not going to enter the movie. And we had to talk about what it means to narrate a movie that's from your point of view. So I drew him. And I drew his parents. And I drew my parents. And I drew my son. And we're all in here as the world around us is sort of burning into a different version of itself, one that we have a lot of time navigating. Like, we have a really hard time navigating, and I wasn't sure if I was burning down the world with this book too. That was maybe what I was most scared of.
What do you mean?
Okay, like, you want to always be careful with the people around you. You want to be careful with the people that you love and the people that love you. And especially so much of my survival in this country has been built around a certain kind of acceptance and coming back at ignorance with love. But what do you do when that no longer works? What do you do when coming back at ignorance with love is getting children in cages at the border? What do you do when coming back at ignorance with love is getting members of your community beaten up? What do you do? And how do you write about the actual horror of what is happening versus the white innocence of your in-laws who simply don't want to see it? How do you bring both of those things to light, and how do you do it in a way that doesn't annihilate the relationship your son has with them, or the relationship your husband has with them, or the relationship you have with them? And I stayed up for 3 years trying to figure that out.
Did you ever think, I can't
Yes.
find that balance?
I did. I wrote the ending of this. So the last piece of this is a letter to my son called The Talk We Haven't Had. Court, I wrote that piece 17 times. Because the first 16 were just angry. It was just the thing of finally getting to say, I see what you're doing to me, and this is what it is. And I'm a person that works with words, so I could get it down really effectively. I could say, I know exactly what you are doing to me. This is it. But it was a letter to my son. And how are you going to write that to your son? You're not going to write that to your son. Like, it took 16 tries for me to realize that's not what you write to your son. What you write to your son is the part that you're actually more hurt about than anything, which is that these people are not monsters. It's not that people are monsters that hurts, right? It's that we love them anyway. That we love them even in their monstrosity, I think, is the hardest part to hold. And what do you do with that? How do you grow a heart that can accommodate that knowledge? I don't actually know, but I know I don't want to put my boy into a world where that isn't an option for him, where he doesn't get to retain all the complexity of love and his humanity at the same time. I don't want to put him in the world like that. So to answer your question, yeah, man, I was scared. I was scared for a long time.
He is now 10.
He's going to be 11 next month.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Has he, I imagine you haven't stopped talking.
No.
He hasn't stopped asking questions. I know that much. There's an element of some of those first conversations in the book that are they go back and forth between these really deep, meaningful, difficult questions and are aliens real? That kind of that kind of thing. As he has grown older and as he has maybe started to experience some of the things not in the abstract necessarily, but in in his day-to-day life, how have those conversations gone now, and how has this book helped the process of talking, or are you always lost as a parent with difficult things?
I mean, a little of both. I think a lot of times he asks me things like every parent knows. I wish the children came with an instruction booklet, that was like, they will ask you this question on this day, be prepared. So that you enter the day with your most kind of ninja emotional warrior self. But they don't.
It wouldn't work anyway.
It wouldn't work anyway. He asks me a lot of questions still. He is getting to the age where he's going to be taller than me probably in the next 2 years. He's a pretty tall kid. He's got the full mustache like most Indian kids do. He looks older than he is. And a lot of his friends are black and brown kids in New York. A lot of his friends that are a little bit older have been pulled aside by the cops and searched. We talk about what that looks like. We talk about what to do in that situation. But as any parent knows, that's really all you can do, right? Is have that talk. And then you have to hope that it's going to work out okay. And just that idea in itself is like holding a bomb between your ribs. There's that. And then there's also the fact that this book is out, and he, sometimes people recognize him, which is super weird. And we'll be walking along, and they'll be like, "You're that kid! You're that mom!" Which is unnerving. And we talked about it before it came out. So he was the only person that I said, you get to say, you don't want this in. If you don't want this conversation in, it goes. You don't even have to explain why. We're done. And he read the whole thing, and he was basically like, "I'm so funny." And I was like, "You are." But he said, "No, I don't want to cut anything." And I said, "Okay." But what I'm prepared for is I think that whenever you're kind of developing a personality, I think there's going to be a day where he reads this and it grates at him, and he's annoyed by it. And I'm just sort of feeling like that's a pretty normal reaction, and I feel like I have to make space for that. The other thing that I have to make space for, and we talked about this before, is he was young. He was 6 to 8, and he's now 10 going on 11. And when this happens, I think when we go to, sometimes when he's with me at readings, people want him to perform a certain kind of racial innocence that's in this book. Like they'll want him to ask those kind of cute, because explaining racism to a 6-year-old is like explaining racism to like a benevolent alien, right? It's just like, how does this world work? And you're like, it's terrible. So there's kind of a sweetness to that, but he's not that person anymore. And so what we have talked about is when people approach him and they're kind of like, say the thing. I know. And when that happens, I have said to him, you never have to play act yourself. And if somebody is asking you to do that, that's not a friend. And you're allowed to just walk away without saying a word. And he's like, that's rude. And I was like, I know. Do it anyway. But also he's older, and I said, you're allowed to be the person you are now. Like I put one small part of you in this book, but I could never capture the complexity of you.
So he didn't ask you to take anything out. Did he ask you why you had put some of these things in?
Oh yes, yeah. We had to have a whole talk about the naked chapter. So that was actually kind of, I told him about it. I didn't have him read it, but I had to explain to him at some point, listen, I drew myself naked in the book at a certain point, and he was like, why would you do that? And I was like, who are you, Mom? Anyway, it was he had this really, he was sort of, why would you do that? And I said, because I think I was raised in a way where there was a lot of shame about my body and about pleasure and about what that looked like. It was just a wall of shame. And as a result, I think I grew up feeling smaller about that body than I ever should have. And I think I internalized a sense of shame that just was completely debilitating, and I didn't need to. And if there's somebody that is younger than me that needs to know that there is another Indian woman in the world who also was in her body and loved it and enjoyed it. If that helps her, then that's helpful to me. And he goes, oh, so it's a feminist thing. And I was like, kind of. And he goes, I'm on board.
The idea of you writing as yourself as a 10-year-old versus this alternating back and forth, I was struck by as you are coming to terms with how to discuss these issues with Z in the present tense, and going back to how maybe you were exposed to some of these, or how the people in your life prepared you or didn't prepare, or answered questions or punted. Can you talk about did you start, how did that make you see yourself then, and also, or the people around you then, and also you now? It's not easy, as we all, I'm a parent now, and I thought I was the best parent in the world before I had kids, because of course I knew everything.
Of course, who doesn't before they're a parent? Yeah.
That's right. And so I'm just curious as to see if having to kind of go back and relive that time gave you any other insight into how maybe the time, back in New Mexico back then, and or I was also struck by the conversations with when you would go back to India. It seemed much more complex, and a way to get at that complexity than just this is me at this time.
Yeah, so there are a few different things that come up in the course of the book. Colorism, obviously, there's a section about I'm darker than everyone in my family, which, as anyone who might be the darkest in their family knows, it's like the great tragedy of the family. I'm the family tragedy, perhaps you are too. And so there was that. There was learning that was really a terrible thing. But there are also so many other things. Like my parents came in 1969. They came as a result of the immigration laws that changed in 65, probably like many of you or many of your parents. And I think they were welcomed into the country to a certain extent, which is not to say that they didn't work hard. They worked ferociously hard. But also, banks gave them loans. The government wanted them here. There was a way in which they were brought into America with more care than many other immigrants that have come here. And so when I was young and I was growing up, and I would ask my parents about racism, they were like, "Oh no, that's no." And my mother later told me, like, "Oh yes, but we didn't want you to know." And I said, "What about Dad?" And she said, "No, your father never understood it. Never even saw it. Never understood it." And I think that was sort of their great naivete, and they were allowed to have that naivete. But it was really confusing for me growing up to see these things happening and to not be able to have a realistic answer about them. So a lot of what has happened with my son is when he sees something, instead of trying to say, like, no, you didn't see that, I just try to ask him questions. Like, what did you see, and what did it feel like, and what did it look like? Because it took me a long time to be able to call the things that were happening to me racist. It took me a long time to even say that word without feeling like I was over-dramatizing something. And so I just wanted him to be able to, because once you can name it, you can find a way around it. You can talk to yourself. You can help each other out. Like, once you can just say, this is the thing, then you have all different ways of accessing your own power. But if you can't even look at it long enough to say, this is what's happening to me, if you're in so much denial about it that all you're trying to do is be a better and better version of yourself, then you've sort of, you've hobbled yourself before you've begun.
Right, and it's similar to the in-laws saying, "Oh, that I don't see that.
Exactly.
I don't see your experience."
Exactly.
So we are ready for questions from the audience. I know, so fast. You read a lot, so yes, sir.
So, what did your dad say when you asked your mom and she said, "Oh no," and then she said, "Oh yes." Mm-hmm. Did you ever ask your dad what happened?
I asked my dad when he was still alive. I did ask him, and he'd say, yeah, but, like it was just that kind of thing. It was just like ellipses, probably entire planets of experience between those ellipses. And so I feel like he was both caught between not wanting to elaborate for my sake, but also not wanting to elaborate for his, you know? Yeah, thanks. Who else?
It's
Hi.
been an interesting discussion. I'm Beena Dara. I'm the mother of 3 daughters, and you were brought into my consciousness by my second daughter, who gifted your book to my older daughter, who is married to an Englishman.
Okay.
Now, after listening to everything you have to say about answers to children, would you say your book is a book of hope, or will she get paranoid?
I live right between hope and paranoia, so probably a bit of both. It's actually my corner of hope and paranoia. You'll find my house there.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. But my question to Mira is, will we see another book when the boy turns 16 and you write that eulogy of your conversation with him? I hope we get to see that. That will be an interesting point, or you already see it coming.
Yeah, I mean, I would never say anything is completely off limits, but I have decided to just let him live his life now for a bit, without worry of being recorded. Because he did start to say to me, after the book was out, he would start talking, he'd be like, "You're not allowed to write about this," which I'm sure every writer has been through. I also just, one of the things that, as we were talking about this, one of the things that came up was he's going to make mistakes. He's going to do all the same blunders that all of us do growing up. And what I would hate most is for somebody to say, "Oh, that was that kid that used to be great, but look at this horrible thing he did." Well, he's allowed to make those mistakes. And I think part of my wanting him to have those mistakes is protecting that privacy a bit. But we'll see. I could get really mad and change my mind. Who else?
I was wondering, have your in-laws read the book and what was their reaction?
Yes. This is often a question. So my in-laws did read the book. I sent it to them before I published it. And I sent it to them with a note that said, it's been a really painful time. Where things had settled out with us, just so you know, is after the election, whenever I would go to their house, they'd say, "Thank you for not speaking of it." And then we would have the entire time when I was there. And they would occasionally say something about how they felt, and then they would say, "But we don't need to speak of it. We don't think he's racist, but we don't need to speak of it." And so part of this was my frustration with that, with being put in a box where to be perceived as loving, I also had to be silent. Because I don't think that's how love functions, really. I gave it to them, and they said, we read it. It's very funny. It's very painful. We're not ready to speak about it. And I said, that's totally fine. You don't ever have to be ready to speak about it. And that's pretty much where we're at. They've never wanted to speak about it more. We still go to holidays together. I still call them once a week to see how they're doing. And we just keep moving forward. Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a granddaughter who my son is married to a white American, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
And my granddaughter looks like a white American.
Yep.
So a lot of people ask her, "Are you Indian or American?" Now I have a same question. How does your son feel? Does he feel anything about India, or he thinks he's totally American?
Oh, well, so my son has a great answer to this question, actually, which is that he often tells people, "I'm Indian in the summer and I'm Jewish in the winter," because of his skin color. But the real answer for him, and I asked him this once, and he said, "But I'm both. I'm both. I'm all the things, Mom. I'm all the things." And I think that's the way that his generation has internalized it. It's not I'm half. What they say to me all the time is, it's not I'm half this and I'm half that. I am all Indian and I am all Jewish. And so that's kind of his way of making sense of it.
Continuation, a little bit of that. My daughter, my granddaughter, a lot of people ask her, you are not an Indian. And Indian people ask her because she said, you don't look Indian.
Yeah.
She said, no, but I am Indian. At least my father is Indian.
Yeah.
But people refuse to accept it. Kids of her age, they refuse to accept that. I mean, I don't know why, but that's a fact.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the idea of passing, right, this is what you're talking about, I think that is a specific kind of loneliness. Because what people are saying is your story isn't your story. I don't have a cure for that kind of loneliness other than become a writer.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have one historical question. If you look at the history of United States, every immigrant community there's been some racism against them. Why, including the whites? For example, when the Italians came here, they were discriminated against. The Jewish. Is the current discrimination any different from what they experienced in the past, or is this more color-based now than before?
I mean, it's color-based in that it's specifically targeting black and brown people in America. So yes, it's very much color-based, but I think it is wildly different in that the laws that have been enacted, even in the last 3 years, are specifically around punishing certain groups of people and not others. And when that happens, and that has happened in America from time to time, but it is specifically happening at a very alarming rate, and there are many different parts of our government that have colluded to enable so many things that we once kind of took for granted to be stricken. And that's real. That's not imaginary, and I don't think that's us overreacting. I think that's people simply keeping track of what's happening and living with the daily horror of it.
We have one more question.
Sorry. Do you see hope in the future that the future waves of immigration or immigrants will not see something that the past waves and the current waves are seeing?
Do I see hope? Let me just repeat this back to you. Do I see hope that the future waves of immigration or immigrants will not see the racism? I don't know that I could honestly say that that's what I think would happen. I do think that there's an expanding consciousness around what a border means. And I think we're calling into question the value of borders, and what that means in that conversation is very interesting to me, in that it makes us question, why do people move, and how do those, and what does a porous border mean, and what does it mean to have to pick up your life and leave, and what does it mean to treat that situation with sympathy rather than disregard? I think that's a complex conversation. But insofar as people are tribal, I think there's always that need to kind of rally around your tribe. What I would hope is that we can expand what our definition of tribe is, right? I mean, I think that's the best hope we've got, is to expand what that definition of tribe is so that it becomes about protecting each other. Does that make sense? Yeah. Thanks. One more?
Do we have time for one more? Is that oh, we've got no more time. We've been kicked out.
Sorry.
Thank you,
bad
Mira.
news.
Thank you so much, Mira.
Thank you. Thank you, Court. For Corey's.